Hello, everybody. This is John Barnwell in Detroit, here with the Reverend David William Parry from the city of London and merry old England, bringing you our 58th episode of What is Truth? Do you believe it? 58. That's quite amount of time devoted to our little endeavor here. And things get more and more complex here in the material world, and so that what we're trying to do is to provide perhaps a simpler, or I don't know that I could really say simpler, but a more accessible path to something that involves the higher impulses that mankind is capable of. And so I see people are starting to drop in. There's Paula from Amsterdam. Hey, Paula. She's one of our good followers here. And David has a new toy. What is that? Nephilim. Oh, yeah, the Nephilim conference. Yeah, we'll chat about that a little bit. And so these things have been rolling along, and I dig into my minds here, the Library of Alexandria, and see if I can come up with something to trigger me into a new avenue. And I started thinking about a conversation I had with Douglas Gabriel the other day, and we started talking about Ralph Waldo Emerson and how Rudolf Steiner had indicated that although spiritual science, as it expressed in America, would tend to be somewhat wooden in character, and I'm paraphrasing, although that's what he said, wooden. I think that's interesting, considering the picture I put up with the two wooden end pieces of pews, but it's British anyways. But that he said that to understand American anthroposophists, one should look to Ralph Waldo Emerson. And so we've been doing that a little bit, Douglas and I, on our other podcast on this same channel. And you might want to check that out if you're checking this out, because I tend to blur things together, because I tend to talk about things that I'm currently thinking about. It's difficult to talk about things that other people think about, unless, of course, you're psychic. And while I have fits and spurts of that type of activity, it's not my continual domain, shall we say. But I started thinking about Britain and certain kind of transcendentalist impulses in Britain. I started thinking about a guy who's very interesting, named Edward Carpenter. And I suspect that David is familiar with him. If not, well, this will be a real treat for him. Well, good. So you have heard of Edward Carpenter. I should know. It seems like I can't bring up hardly anything without you already being familiar with it, at least somewhat. I guess that's why we're doing this. But in any regards, well, I'd love to hear what you have to say about Edward Carpenter.
Afternoon, John. Can't say. Yeah, I know the name. I know the work roughly. Can't say that I've looked into him in any depth whatsoever. Loosely associated by certain people with the British Romantic movement, which I sort of don't agree with. Yeah, I mean, it was the American. I'm a little surprised Rudolf Steiner said that, to be honest. I've always been very uplifted by American transcendentalism and the fact it was going its own way irrespective of the European impulse. Carpenter for me is one of those people that's interesting, but it's interesting that it's a wet day on a Sunday afternoon here. It's interesting that I like cupcakes. It's interesting. It's interesting that I prefer Earl Grey tea, but it's no great shakes. Whereas someone like Emerson actually is great shakes in transcendentalism. I think in European terms, transcendentalism probably blurs very easily into other metaphysical streams. Therefore, it's something that either, an individual in that stream either grabs you or doesn't. I can't pretend Mr. Carpenter grabbed me in any way, shape, or form. If I'm thinking in terms of, if I walked into a room, a Jesuit friend of mine who I've mentioned before, we had a game a couple of years ago. What would you be in the room? Would you be the cleverest person in the room? And I always thought that my role was actually to be the artiest person in the room. I can't imagine anything more tedious than being the cleverest person in the room. So Carpenter always struck me as someone that wanted to be the cleverest person in the room. So it wasn't really something that grabbed me. I mean, if we compare him to someone like T.H. Green, the British Hegelian and idealist, who actually historically lived close by to me, in Clapham, that I find that a lot more grabbing and interesting. Or people that slap you around the face metaphysically, metaphorically, by coming up with what they do. I mean, I remember the first time I read Husserl, the founder, to my mind, of the whole modern phenomenological impulse, and suddenly realizing that was an incredibly singular mind. And he was talking about, I don't know, for me, it was almost like a revelation, me paraphrasing, stop telling the world what it's doing and listen to it. I thought, oh my God, maybe we can learn from the world and not keep instructing it to fit in with our theory, fit in with our theories. Oh my God. So that's the sort of person I think that hits me more than one or two British transcendentalists or European transcendentalists that sort of aren't really up to the, dare I say this, up to the mark of European idealism. Because over here it makes a lot less sense. I don't really think idealism took off in America. I'm thinking maybe of someone like Josiah Royce, who I actually like quite a great deal. But yeah, I mean, if you're looking for that sort of thing in this neck of the woods, I think you look at the idealists, not really the Carpenters of the world. I'm passing that back to you before I come too negative, because I don't really want to sound negative. More power to his elbow. Good luck, Edward, but not my ting. Handing back.
Excuse me, I had to. Well, actually, I think that you're kind of not giving him credit, and it's interesting because he's someone who's was a big influence on a great many people that you are a fan of, but not everybody knows that. In fact, he lives in the realm of obscurity here in America. People have no idea about him. He wrote his probably most well-known book is Towards Democracy, and he was a pioneer in socialism. But his socialism was different in that it was kind of like the idea, which is really a theosophical notion that is even shared by Rudolf Steiner. He says in the future we won't need government because we will have aligned ourselves with the intentions of the divine spiritual beings, and that if two people are having an argument about something or a difference of opinion, either both of them are wrong or one of them is wrong. Because when it comes to truth, it's like mathematics. So 1 and 1 is 2 all day long. I mean, perhaps if you live in a universe where 1 and 1 isn't 2, I mean, there are levels at which the type of formulaic thinking that leads to 1 and 1 is 2 is will not give you the key. And that's, of course, we've discussed before, the shortfall in the materialist mechanistic thinking, where they say 1 and 1 is 2, and you could bring a husband and wife together and they could have 12 kids. So 1 and 1 is 12 in the world of life. But that, going back to Edward Carpenter, it's interesting because he was gay, by the way. Not many people know that, but he was a pioneer in developing the whole concept of gay rights. There really wasn't even such a thing till he came along. And then when you get into the circle of people that he ran with. But first we'll go perhaps to one of his early influences, which is when he began to correspond with Walt Whitman, and which is really a seminal influence for him. Whitman also was gay, and you know, for me that's kind of neither here nor there. And I mean, and I don't mean to be insensitive to friends out there who are of that persuasion. That's their thing. But with me, I find it interesting that these things aren't even known. But if you get into understanding, he corresponded with lots of people. I mean, he corresponded with Annie Besant, Isadora Duncan, Mahatma Gandhi, Jack London. He's friends with William Morris. He was a good friend of Rabindranath Tagore. He was Walt Whitman and Aldous Huxley. You know, everybody at the time of these types of people that I mentioned, Algernon Blackwood. He actually wrote a book in which Carpenter, it's based around Carpenter, the lead character in the book, in his novel. So you see that this guy had this idea, and he wrote the book Civilization, Its Cause and Cure, in which he went into the ills of civilization, and he was like kind of a champion of the idea of the noble savage, and which is an interesting concept. And again, in order to be able to look at something like that, you really have to look toward the future, when mankind has begun to work into the astral sufficiently to develop the manas, or spirit self, and then even further to begin to work into the etheric body, which leads to the life spirit. And that's when one begins to be more concerned about the state of being of your fellow human than you are for yourself. And we're just not there yet. And so the experiments in socialism that have happened, you can't name a government that has succeeded, although you can name small communities that were able to work along those kinds of guidelines. And we had those types of utopian communities here in America. And of course, one of the people that was inspired by Edward Carpenter in India is Sri Aurobindo, who's a very significant figure in a certain regard in India. And although he's not my school of thought, one of the people that I most respect has the complete shelf full of Sri Aurobindo books. And he referenced it frequently. And so I was exposed to Aurobindan thought. And of course, his wife, she was a remarkable woman too. And that ties into that whole theosophical circle, because that's where she came out of, the Davison group, and ties into the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor, and that whole circle of esoteric study that has been tied into the early theosophical movement. Maybe one of these episodes will explore that, because that's a whole thing in itself, and that's pretty interesting. So in that regard, I see him as being more significant than he's given credit for, because all these he's one of those people that that connects other people. And so his activity in introducing people was actually, in a way, more significant than the works that he produced, even, I think. You know, it's kind of like another character I think of in England like that is Lawrence Oliphant. I mean, that guy was everywhere. That guy knew everybody. I mean, if you wanted to find something out, you went to Lawrence Oliphant, and he could give you the all the secret intrigue that was going on around Madame Blavatsky, for example. Or he could tell you about how he was wounded in Japan when he was there, or the community that he started in Lebanon, and the role he played in the founding of Israel. I mean, Lawrence Oliphant's like all over the place, but yet Americans, they've never heard of him. You know, I got his main book here, and I have the book that his daughter put together from his remaining journals. And so if you're studying the history of esotericism, he's not a person to be overlooked. But getting back to Edward Carpenter, his idea of the noble savage is interesting, because if you read his books, you can't really argue with him and the flaws that he points out. But to be able to come up with a system of government based upon some of those ideas, it just ends up becoming a totalitarian state with a bunch of busybodies. You know, you got half the country spying on the other half the country kind of deal. You know, that whole Soviet overlord system, which is mirrored in the corporatism of the fascist view of the world. So we don't like that kind of stuff. And that's not what he was getting at. And he was in there with one of the early socialists. Well, it was that group of artists, the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, that centered around William Morris and Dante Gabriel Rossetti. And it's just a fantastic group of artists. And the crafts movement was started by William Morris. And it was really a key to understand the burgeoning middle class culture in England, to where the crafts movement was making decorative objects for the home. They were beautiful. In fact, that picture on the masthead for this show, that tapestry behind me, that's after the style of a William Morris tapestry. And so in creating art objects for the home that in ordinary you didn't have to be a lord or a lady to be able to afford, was a major step in British culture that contributed very greatly to the refinement of British tea society, where they'd sit there with their William Morris wallpaper and a ring. Oh yes, yes. Get that finger up. and I'm sure by now you already have some jokes you're just dying to tell. But so it's interesting to see the way Victorian society advanced around the craft culture, because it made these things attainable for the ordinary person and helped to create a more refined home life in Britain.
You actually beat me to the William Morris set. I think British socialism is actually really quite wonderful, at least in what it was. I'm not sure there's anything wonderful in it at the minute. I actually bumped into one of the party organisers with my partner a week or so ago, a couple of weeks ago, a conservative who was one of the kingmakers. I don't want to mention names, I've got to be very careful. Is one of the current kingmakers of the Conservative Party. And we got him on his own, and I said, right, so what do you think of the Labour leadership? Which was very, very interesting. Only personal opinions, where he said Corbyn was actually a good man, but all over the place. So you couldn't really trust him to run a government. Whereas the present guy, what's it, Starmer, who on earth knows who he is? And I thought, well, that's incredibly interesting. If you think of the British socialist movement, only really makes sense in Britain. I don't know what it's like on the continent. I suspect it's unique. It's very gentle. It's very civilizing. I would say it grew out of the upper working classes, lower middle classes. Again, categorizations that make no sense outside of this country. And the idea was that basically people should have access to the arts and crafts that they produce. It's not just for the upper class. And I'm thinking of a guy called Pugin, who basically was trying to remake the beauties of the medieval period, but according to modern principles, where you could actually sort of, John Barnwell's just vanished off the screen, and those are the times I hate most because I panic. Anyway, Pugin, where you've got the glories of the Middle Ages, but all of which could be assembled, disassembled, and reassembled to fit the ethos of modern times, so they could be taken down somewhere and rebuilt somewhere else. Which is wonderful. I mean, there are a couple of Pugin churches in the area around me. Stunning. His problem was, apart from being a genius who no one was listening to, constantly running out of money. And I mean, one of the churches, there's a Redemptorist church, Catholic Redemptorist church in Clapham, where you walk into the stunning neo-medieval hall, and then you suddenly bounce your nose on the back wall because there's hardly any mileage between the front and the back because Pugin ran out of money. So you've got a couple of feet of these glories, and then he ran out of money and it all stops. So yeah, I mean, British socialism, as the pre-Raphaelites thought of it, as William Morris thought of it, his workshop isn't a million miles away from here. It's very close to where I live at the minute. What's left of it. It's not a working workshop as far as I know now. I don't think so. It was gentle. It was civilizing, as I said. It was reacting against the British upper classes. All you lucky American boys and girls, you don't know what it's like growing up in a class system where inherited privilege is literally that. You are not one of us. You never will be one of us. You are simply there to do as we want and then die. That's the attitude. Why I didn't become a total raving Marxist-Leninist, I don't know. Because it really does push you in that direction. A recent example during the second lockdown, all of us mere peasants couldn't even leave the house without police sirens beginning to sound. But of course, the social elite were there drinking their champagne, ignoring the lockdown, social distancing, mask wearing, which apparently keeps everybody alive, laughing and joking and toasting each other with champagne in front of the cameras. And the police, as usual, bowing and scraping because that's the elite. That's Britain. Therefore, I find any reaction against that rather health-giving, because, who on earth do these people think they are? And it's a system of deference that is dying, but what is replacing it is ugly. It is shrill and ugly and on the verge of chaotic. So we've got a lot of problems we're sort of slowly emerging into here. And gentle, civilizing British socialism has gone. Where rapidly, this isn't a dig. I think the Americanization of British culture, we tend to get the worst bits as opposed to the good bits. We have this sort of, we're developing very, very quickly into some sort of, democratic is not the right word, some sort of system of representatives which are lobbied left, right, and centre, which was never the idea here. To vote in particular ways by the big companies, by the vested interests. That's never happened here. That's starting to happen here. And MPs now, have they all been bought and sold? I don't know. It's really beginning to look like it. And we've got to think, well, so we've got the good, the Americans have a constitution. Why haven't we got a constitution? And there's a big row about what that means. I think it's very clear. Some people still think it's everything from Magna Carta onwards. And people forget what Magna Carta was. It was the nobility dragging the king to have a heart and a brain, you know. So it wasn't this big, all-powerful democratic move. It was when your knobs had trouble with it all, let alone us peasants. And you know, so there, you know, Oliver Cromwell and so on and so on. But basically, if you're keeping an eye on parliamentary debate, and if you're keeping an eye on Hansard, that all-powerful system that records what people say in Westminster Palace, really it just seems to be three words. Parliament is sovereign, and that is our entire constitution. That is what holds all the power, which means effectively nowadays that Parliament is unaccountable. It's unaccountable to the electorate, it's unaccountable to the party, and they live by that principle with gusto. Referendums, I mean, referendums are now being defined as the opinion of the electorate. So hang on, we're not even now allowed to vote things down in a mass vote if we disagree with them. No, and you know, I was told off recently by a friend of mine who was also a pass holder at Parliament. I used to do a lot of work with the Lords. We used to work quite closely at one point with Lord John Laird, you know, an Irish rebel. Therefore, that was someone I could do business with. He was a lot of fun. Passed on a couple of years ago prematurely. My dear friend was his parliamentary advisor, and I was fulminating that Boris, that man has no scruples whatsoever, I'm sorry, was twisting everything yet again, including our so-called constitution, to get exactly what he wanted. And I was told off by my pass-holding friends saying, look, they all do that. They all do that. He's no different at all. They all do that. And you think, well, you know, what do we want? What do we want as a people? What do we want as citizens of Britain? But we've got to remember at the end of the day, it's only grudgingly that the word citizen is used, because officially, at least quasi-officially still, we're subjects of the Queen. So as a mere subject, I'll hand back to you, John, on that very depressing note.
You catch me when I'm digging in my files. Yeah, well, again, you're talking about what is that? Shakespeare? Is that Shakespeare, human, all too human, or? Yeah, or was it Nietzsche? Yeah, takes a while for that part of my brain to kick in sometime. And again, in looking at this, and it's that's the trouble, because well, there's numerous statements that Rudolf Steiner had made regarding socialism. Yeah, I mean, I've frequently cited the reference he was talking about when he would lecture to workers, and he would lecture to any group that wanted him to lecture, and he was commenting on lecturing to the Socialist Workers' Party, and that he could talk about anything. It was fine as long as he didn't talk about freedom, which is like, you know, if anything is important for our humanity to be able to unfold its wings, it's that freedom. And that's the thing that needs to be protected. Of course, in your domain, I guess we'd call it a domain, wouldn't we? Because there's a domination. That's what domain means, is that this region is dominated by blank blank. And in your case, and I'm not laughing at you, I'm laughing with you, okay? But we had the good fortune of having founding fathers who created a system of checks and balances to try and remedy the situation that they found completely untenable with King George. And that's well and good, but if you get into looking at it more closely, that's problematic too on a couple of different points. Because, of course, there's the 10th letter of the Federalist Papers, where James Madison is saying that we've managed to figure, and I'm paraphrasing because I didn't look it up, but we managed to find ways of protecting the people against certain things. But there's one thing that we couldn't accomplish, and that was to protect the people against, well, what we would call special interests. And that's the whole thing. So that would be like lobbyists or NGOs or political alliances and all of that. And so whenever things start to consolidate to where it becomes this system, the bigger the system it gets, the worse it becomes as far as the nature of an individual human being. And again, the other aspect of the challenge of Americanism, as we could call it, is that it was really founded as an economic system. That was their rub with the king. He had his hand in their pocket at every turn, and they didn't like it. And so they tried to get out of that relationship. And they managed to do it pretty successfully, but not as successfully as you would think based upon anybody who's studied American history. You'd think that we really won the American Revolution when actually we got General Cornwallis to surrender, but King George never surrendered. Wait, and the control of the waterways, the harbors and all that, after the end of the Revolutionary War was still in British hands, and the main rivers, and that whole control. And in fact, a remnant of that legacy is the U.S. Postal Department, which is, if you look into the history of the Postal Department and its relation to a British postal system, it's really very interesting. And so things are never what they appear to be, I guess is the point I want to make, because we're not given all the information. And when you're in a program called What is Truth, it's kind of a rocky road because, okay, how are we going to do this? Seeing as how I can't use the media really because they lie about basically everything, unless they are reporting on that a dog was hit by a car in front of a hospital, that they could manage to pull that off. But get any beyond that, and you're in pretty precarious territory, especially the way things are today, where they've pulled out all the stops and they want to really relegate us to entertainment. It's merely entertainment. It's not really news. They're not journalists. They're presenters. In fact, they unabashedly call them that now, I guess, at the BBC. And they read teleprompters. And of course, over at American Intelligence Media and Americans for Innovation, we've dug under the hood to figure out who's running the teleprompters. And it's the same old, same old. And I don't want to get into it here because we're not really, our voyage here isn't a voyage of machinations. It's a voyage of cultural enrichment, hopefully. And so getting into looking at it more closely, you see that there's this kind of a universal lineage that keeps raising its head up in spite of whatever machinations might be going on in the world of governance, so to speak. And Emerson is a good example of it here in America because he's truly a universal citizen, so to speak. But one of his biggest influences, of course, was the Brit Thomas Taylor, the Platonist, who translated so many works into English. And I mentioned him on occasion before. But I don't know I haven't really specifically asked David if he's conversant with any of the works of Thomas Taylor.
I think you should know the answer to that before now. I've come across nearly everybody, but it doesn't mean I've got depth of reading in everybody. Yeah, the English Platonists, I got into him curiously later than the others because I love the music of Vaughan Williams. Fine Welsh boy. Fantasy on a, what was it? Fantasia on a Theme by Thomas Tallis, which is still, I mean, that's the soul of England in music, and he describes it thus wise. Vaughan Williams, of course, became some sort of deist, some sort of agnostic, some sort of deist, probably because of the cultural shock, which is nowadays not understood, of World War One. I mean, the world had never encountered those level of atrocities, that level of violence, that level of ruthlessness en masse before. So, I mean, that's really what shattered European cultures, plural. It wasn't World War II. I mean, some people, some evil revisionists at Oxford at the moment, and I little extra time for Oxbridge, but every now and again they say something almost worth listening to. They don't even think there were two world wars, and basically it was one world war with a gap in the middle. And I can sort of go along with that. Because the Second World War was really based on what went wrong in the First World War with racism. So, so the extra bit to get the juices going, I suppose. It's hard to forget the loss of it. It's hard to contextualize. It's hard to quantify. Let me put it that way. The loss of innocence that had across Europe, and it's still reverberating. It's still loudly reverberating at the edges of all our societies. So yes, I remember reading not only at university. Remember, I sort of did the history of ideas and then theology, 2 theology degrees. So I remember looking at them. I'd read a bit of them before then because I went late to university, and it made me think. Am I some sort of surrogate Platonist? I don't know is the answer. Is also beautiful, and the Neoplatonists love all the psychic stuff, So yeah, the English Platonists had this incredibly deepening and civilizing influence on the Anglican communion, a communion I don't respect much nowadays because of what it became, and on British society generally. But that belongs to a certain time frame, sadly. Certainly without the Platonists, you don't get the English metaphysicals. I think the two are hand in glove. You don't get one without the other. Therefore, the enrichment of our society goes on and on from them. But it increasingly became a church movement for church people and isolated itself, unfortunately, in that way. I mean, you were mentioning a little earlier the Noble Savage. Of course, that's shades of Rousseau, who was looking at all this early anthropological material coming into Europe about Native Americans and Hawaiians and all these beautiful people walking around in the buff and eating fruit and basically enjoying themselves and being nicer people than most of the people here. So, I mean, what one has to remember that even Rousseau doesn't think we should go back to that. I mean, he's saying, those influences are gone. Again, there are residues, there are leftovers, but they're gone. You can't really go back to that. So even Rousseau didn't really want a recovery of that. What he wanted, of course, was eventually formulated in the idea of the social contract, where people get together and make rational agreements. Oh my God, whatever happened to all this glorious rationality in social affairs? I don't go for this modern ersatz religion called politics. Politics is only politics. I'm sorry. There are religious impulses. There are political impulses. Someone in Canada told me recently, politics, I think I might have said this before, politics was the air that you breathe and the water that you drink, to which I said, sorry, I'm not a Maoist. I don't go along with that. I've had a look at the little red book by Chairman Mao. It doesn't float my boat. I'm sorry. But then again, I'm not communist Chinese, so there we are. That is not politics. That's religion. The air we breathe belongs to the angels. The water we drink is something sacred. It's not to do with politics. Politics is a rational system of how we form representative governments and what the nature of the executive should be in those circumstances. Well, some people would say, like the anarchists, we don't even need any. Sadly, I think that's a little optimistic for the time being. William Blake was an anarchist. He wanted to do away with the entire system. But, with great respect to William Blake, not everybody is like you, being a couple of hundred years ahead of your time and a great poet. Therefore, we've got to assume we look at the lowest common denominator, not the highest bid, So I suppose it leads me back to representative government. Gosh, I don't know why we're taking that course today, but it's interesting. It's been on my mind a bit. I posted a quote by Gramsci, Antonio Gramsci, who, of course, was the cultural Marxist, because somebody said to me a couple of weeks ago that he actually veered towards utopianism. Now, I read the prison notebooks years back. I've got a copy around here somewhere. I must admit, I can't spot to this day the utopian elements in that book. I mean, it's ingenious, but I don't agree with it. I can't really spot the utopian bit. And what he's talking about, I suppose, is the mother and father of so many of our problems at the moment, where he does think that sort of socialist ideas do end up encompassing realms and kingdoms, queendoms, where they simply shouldn't be. Therefore, I don't go along with that. Politics is only politics. No, look at Aristotle. The master science, simply because we need something somewhere to shelter, something to eat, something to drink, and then we can do philosophy properly. So that was, that's the horse's mouth since Aristotle started all this. I'd rather go along with that. I also am interested in utopianism and utopian so-called communities. Don't forget we had them in Britain, like the diggers and the levelers, who come up with wonderful little ditties. I think this was the levelers. When Adam delved and Eve span, who was then the gentleman? What a wonderful... I mean, it's not epic poetry, but how wonderful, what a wonderful thing to say. So, what we've got to do, I suspect, is learn from these early attempts at something more widespread, not simply brush them away, as lots of people want to do. At the moment, the British elite, I agree with you 100,000 trillion %, sadly, that everything is being reduced to entertainment now. Everyone's being reduced to eternal adolescence now. Don't think, have a bit of happiness. Don't enjoy. I mean, if you enjoy something, that's a bit too deep. Therefore, it might start triggering thoughts and feelings. So don't do that. But, have a bit of happiness. Go on to the fun fair. I mean, there were two things that struck my mind in that part of your depressing but wonderful view. There was the American military are openly talking about UFOs nowadays. Something's going on. We've all got to stop pretending it isn't. What it is the interesting bit. Who knows? And I noticed there was a report on I can't remember, forgive me, one of these big American, I think it was either Early Morning or, it's like Good Morning Britain here. All the airwaves are dulled into silence. Well, two semi-comedians have their view of the day, or, early TV in the evening before everyone's had supper. And there were three young ladies, presenters quite openly, and the military had been doing something about, what do they call them nowadays? Something aerial phenomena. Just say bloody UFO. We all know what that means, and you're talking about the same thing. So some American military guy was talking about that in great earnestness and how we all had to take this into account. And it turned into a joke. And by these three harpies, these three harridans of the press, where the lead one basically said, you could tell she was the lead. She was sat at the far end of the table wearing the sparkly dress, which managed to somehow outsparkle the other two. So I noticed that. And she said, oh, all that stuff. It's better to, I quote, it's better to remain in blissful ignorance. You're joking, love. So what if it is aliens and the greatest event in human history is unfolding in front of us? Humanity meets another species, but you get on with Baywatch, you get on with Fantasy Island, enjoy yourself, have another game. There's a game show just half an hour away. It's been scheduled. You enjoy it. I don't know what's wrong with people nowadays. I'm getting into palaver. I'll hand back to you, John. Just saying that it's a shame that in Britain and Europe it makes saddening, perpetually horrific, meaning. There's meaning to it. The upper classes simply don't want anyone that's not in their network to think or feel or do anything apart from their little jobbies for the elite and then die. Therefore, I understand in European terms what they're doing. In American terms, I simply don't. I mean, the land of the brave and the home of the free, outrageous, and also, if we're thinking back of the transcendentalists, I remember something Husserl said, isn't it amazing, paraphrasing again, isn't it amazing that the truth isn't simply limited to facts? The transcendentalists were juggling with those thoughts way beyond my wonderful Husserl. And what they did, their critical attitude to organized religion, which ironically as a pastor I've always shared, the idea of self-reliance, not in a terrible right-wing way, stand on your own 2 feet. You're a child of the universe. Be proud, be what you were created to be, something beautiful, something intelligent, something meaningful. And then self-reliance and just get on with your own affairs. I mean, these values are lost at our own peril. Be free. Explore your own liberality. Be free. Walden and Ralph Waldo Emerson. All of that. Dave looking at the pond for all those years. We've lost something incredibly valuable. I don't think the British, if they deserve the title transcendentalists, are anywhere near that, because that sort of flame can only really burst into a fire outside of the confines of Europe and all the things designed to hold it in place, because that for me is an insight of us evil lower orders, of the working men and people striving to find the true spirituality, meaning and value of their own being. And I can't imagine anything more beautiful. But over here, it will always be reduced to being a wet blanket, where even a tinderbox can't ignite it into a single flame. Something very depressing. God bless America, that's what I say. What would we all do without it? You lot need to pull yourselves together and remember what a privileged position you're in. Signed off, sad old Brit. Handing back to you, John.
Well, boy, I stirred it up today. Yeah, we'll explore some of that. But I wanted to show you, this is the gentleman. Let's see if I can get this. There he is. That's Thomas Taylor, the Platonist. This is in the Canadian National Gallery in Ottawa. I have no idea how it ended up there, but that's a frontispiece illustration to the Secret Doctrine Reference Series edition of 5 books of Plato. And a wonderful translation, especially it's for the footnotes, of course, that I like Thomas Taylor. He always manages to find the references within the Neoplatonic writers relative to the dialogues of Plato. I used to have his 5-volume translation of Plato. I used to have a lot of stuff, a lot of Taylor translations. Of course, not many first editions. Those are really valuable. And they left me many, many, many years ago. But in getting to understand that was a result of Bronson Alcott journeying to England And he was there with a couple other British gentlemen, and he got a whole collection of Thomas Taylor's translations and brought them back to the United States. And he was the individual that got Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau and other Americans interested in Taylor's translations into English. And as I've said before, in England, it was a different story because so many of the people there that had been educated enough to appreciate those types of works already knew Greek and Latin, so they would quibble about the translation of a single word. And I remember bringing them up to my friend who taught philosophy in University of Toronto, and I've mentioned him on occasion, but it was like, there's a word, and I have it in my files here somewhere, but where Socrates, he says, certainly in the Taylor translation, which is more accurately translated, it seems so. And there's a world of difference. And so you can imagine the discrepancy between just that one word. And yes, that's true. And so you have to keep digging, yes. And but that's an important aspect of American transcendentalism. That, along with Goethe, influenced Emerson also, especially bringing to his attention the Persian poets, Hafiz, Sadi, and things of that nature. And he started to explore the sacred writings of all different cultures. And so that is kind of the bedrock out of which American transcendentalism has developed. And we could explore that more, and I'll take a whole nother episode just to begin that, because there's another gentleman whose name is Carpenter who did quite a nice survey of that whole journey. Here it is. Emerson in Asia. Not the easiest book to find. It's by Frederick Ives Carpenter, but I imagine you could probably find it on academia.org. I haven't looked because I have the book, but I'm sure it's probably there. And there's another work that, going off on another tangent. David, you mentioned this the other day. There's my Old Bourne Press edition of the Comte de Gabalis, well-worn old copy that has really profuse footnotes included that are selected from the works of Thomas Taylor. There you go. Yeah. In kind of a way, I wish I had that edition instead of this one. This one is pretty delicate, but it was published by the brothers. It's kind of a mysterious way to print a book. But there were people that did things anonymously back then. It was interesting because there's something spiritual about anonymity. And I think probably they didn't want to lose their job. If somebody found out that they were the one that wrote the book or whatever, they'd be ostracized for what reason or another. But that was then. And as things started unfolding more and more, then you'll find that this whole idea of what we now call Me Too culture that's spreading, it became a caricature of itself. And so that people like to grab short phrases that appear to be idealistic, but they want to bully you with kindness, I guess is what it is. It's like, well, I don't want to be bullied with anything, especially kindness. Don't, what do they say? Kill them with kindness. We're doing this for your own good. We're going to lock you up. It's for your own good. and to protect all the people that you love. Yeah, okay. Well, so anyways, it's kind of strange the way things happen, but if you give a government an opportunity to do something, they will screw it up. That's about the only guarantee you have in government. So you best give them fewer and fewer assignments because they will screw it up. I mean, here in America, you think it's so great over here. Well, we have our government's like the largest bureaucracy in the world, I think. You know, maybe China's is bigger. You know, I don't know. But ours is, with the senior executive service and all these faceless, nameless, unelected bureaucrats that we've got that are the ones that are actually turning the knobs and pulling the levers of power here in the U.S. It's like, if you think we have representative government, well, let's just say California hasn't changed governors lately. You know, it's like, so it's kind of it's a caricature of government at this point. So I think that to be represented is one thing, to be ruled is another. But over there, you have an interesting system, though, because the way it's constructed. I mean, you have your House of Commons, which is fundamentally something that the king gave as a concession to the Anglo-Saxons. And then you have the House of Lords, and that's the lordly houses that are fundamentally, for the most part, Anglo-Norman. And so you have the activity that goes on between them, but the real linchpin in your government is the secrecy of it all, in that everything is run by committees, and the only one who knows who are on all those committees is the Queen. People don't know that. They don't. People in England don't know that, or UK, whatever you want to call it. And so she gets these little red boxes in the middle of the night, and she runs these committees, and they make decisions, and they give these bills names that wouldn't give you a clue as to what it's about. Oh, by the way, Bill QR 726. You know, oh, that tells you a lot, doesn't it? At least you're being honest in your secrecy. Over here, they give them the name that's kind of the opposite of what the bill actually is. It's like, if it's telling you it's doing something nice for you, that just points out what it's taking away. And there was a senator appointed recently, and he said that every time that they make a decision in Congress, human rights are reduced.
Yeah, I don't want to take away from the inspiration of the day, Mr. Carpenter. But with great respect to him, there were lots of people involved in the formulation of what would one day become gay rights, marginal rights, gay rights. I mean, it was tied in with the suffragettes as well. I mean, you know, the idea, who does the franchise actually include? So it was, you know, it's good that there were people continually raising these issues, but with the greatest respect to him, and I'm sure he thought he was the linchpin of it all, but actually it was lots of different people, all of whom deserve a bit of credit, because, you know, people forget it was actually the votes for women that raised more eyebrows than the eventual votes for gays. Oh, these women! What are they? What? Keep your headscarf on, love, and do as you're told. You know, I mean, that was the real page turner, the real shocker in this part of the world. You know, Emily Pankhurst tying herself to government railings and suffragettes throwing themselves in front of horses at race courses. You know, I mean, and a right-wing friend of mine, yes, I've got, as you know, John, I've got friends on the right and the left. A right-wing friend of mine said recently, and it was women that opposed the suffragettes. You know, don't be a caveman. You know, is it good that women have a vote? Yes. You know, I don't really see the problem with that. Is it good if everybody has a vote? Yes, we're meant to be democracies, meant to be, being the operative phrase, of course. Yeah, I don't think people hide secrecy in this part of the world because we have a social elite. We have an aristocracy. Some of them, their families have been there, some of them for 900 years. They're not going anywhere. Therefore, the peasants, us peasants, aren't on the same footing. We don't have the same say. We don't have the same clout. Therefore, why bother pretending anything? Why bother? Get rid of the codes. Just say exactly what it is at the top of the white paper, at the top of the bill. It doesn't matter anyway. Because most of I like the free churches, as you know, and I always resonate back with free church at the end of the day, with evil Unitarians, Baptists, with Quakers, people that believe in people. And certainly they were the civilizing forces during the Industrial Revolution and beyond. Certainly it wasn't the Anglican Communion, where to this day, stories of delicate Unitarian ladies, the wife of the pastor, who go into these awful industrial hellholes and start reading circles and Sunday school. But I mean, it was basically them that stopped the complete barbarity of this country and that gave genuine spiritual and, dare I say, medical and political alleviation to parts of society that were considered, completely superfluous. This whole Malthusian, the surplus people stuff. I mean, that's still a part of the thinking here. I don't think it matters to put the exact name at the top of the bill. It doesn't matter. The head of state is the Queen. It's not the Prime Minister. Nobody ever pretends it's the Prime Minister, apart from one or two semi-delusional movies. I hear there's one coming out. Has it come out, or is going to come out, where Agent Scully from the X-Files is playing Margaret Thatcher, and there's tension between her and the Queen. There was tension between her and the Queen, but it wasn't on the scale that apparently appears in the movie. The Queen's the head of state, period. There's no discussion. The Prime Minister isn't. He or she is the Prime Minister to the Crown. There is no equanimity. And even Thatcher, at her most self-possessed, realised that. A very complex phenomena, Thatcher. That would need an entire programme to get into. She was a very complex person. And the Thatcher legacy, of course, was actually very clever. This far in going backwards and no further, which, of course, is being completely thrown away by the present government. That want to take. I mean, how far exactly do they want to take us back in time? We are all time travellers in Britain at the moment. We're passing mid-Victoriana, getting back to early Victoriana. Who knows? We might be back at serfdom any day now. We've got to be careful what it is we think these people want and what they're doing and who they're serving, because it certainly isn't the electorate. I mean, I was thinking the other day, curiously, there used to be something in the 70s called community policing. Who is it that the police serves? Remember, I'm talking about the UK. I'm not talking about anywhere else. And it was decided in those slightly more enlightened days, the sort of the sunset of genuinely liberal values. That was the period, if we look back, that they serve the community. After all, we pay their wages, so yes, they should serve the community. Now, of course, if you look at their militarized training and the weaponry, there's no other word for it, they actually get to use against the people that pay their wages. It's absolutely astonishing. I don't know where Britain's going. It's going into a very ugly place. It's not going into a very spiritual place. And it's going into this sort of quasi-delusional Britain that never existed. I mean, if you talk to some conservatives at the moment, British conservatives, everything was perfect in the 1950s. I don't remember, I mean, I wasn't born till 1958, but, I don't remember any of my parents or any of my family saying it was utopia, since there's a utopian theme to this show. In fact, it was just after the war. There was very little money in the system. People were forced to be deferential in a way they didn't want to be, because a lot of them had been through the war, simply didn't want that. Like the great treasure of the British Health Service, which is being politicised at the moment. Now it's becoming a political weapon against the people. I never saw that coming. People forget, why did the British Health Service start? Which is a wonderful idea. It began basically because all these young men who knew how to fight came back from the war and they wanted service. That was why we ended up with the British Health Service. And surprise, surprise, it's disappearing now, being bought by the Chinese on one hand or Russians on the other, or the internal market is selling bits off to vested interests internally. Why? Because there are no young men now who've just been to a war and know how to fight and have their own weaponry. That's why. So, yeah, we've got to be, I don't know, John. We've got to revalue our values. I put on Facebook something earlier today, the average hourly rate that a nurse gets. And remember, when I'm talking about the NHS, I'm not talking about the saintly nurses that go into a poorly paid profession where you're treated like shit. So, no, I'm not talking about these remarkable angelic individuals. I'm certainly not talking about the doctors who have years of training in very difficult and complex and demanding subjects to receive basically zero payback. Their wages are laughable, and the respect they're given nowadays is tantamount. Well, it's diminishing year by year. And who do we exactly see when we're sick and when we're poorly? But the village herbalist is good to keep us healthy, but if you're in a car crash or something similar, you don't want to see the village herbalist. You need a hospital. You need modern medically trained people. So all that's disappearing along with the culture of deference. Compared to a British footballer, I think they got over £7,000 pounds an hour compared to a nurse. Until we start to revalue our values and look much more carefully at what it is we think we're doing. We need anthroposophy to come back with a vengeance. We need aggressive anthroposophists marching up and down the cultural high streets and saying enough is enough. Let me just round up by saying, I worked with the Lords because they're, when I was involved in those circles, currently I'm not, because there's more sense and stability. What do they do in the House of Commons? Keep fighting to stay in office. So you can't actually say anything to them. Oh my God, how will that look in a press release? That's all they think in the House of Commons. Sod the lot of them. Resign. Is the House fit for purpose? No, resign. Whereas the Lords have their money and they have their position, so they're not that bothered. So how is this country configured? How will it always be configured? How probably will it always be configured? With a monarch, an aristocracy, a shrinking middle class that makes us third world, of course. The minute the middle classes start to shrink, that's when we become third world. And us evil oi polloi at the bottom that simply have to do our jobs and die. Handing back to you, John.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting take, and I find that to be true. For example, look at Lord Monckton, a remarkable human being. And he was able to take and deconstruct this mathematical model that's centered around the predictions of Al Gore with global warming and all that kind of stuff. And he was able to totally deconstruct the mathematics of that model to where now you don't hear much about it. They don't really try to defend it because they really can't. And if we hear about it significantly in the future, it'll just be because somebody's forcing it down our throats, and it's just an excuse for something else. But and it's interesting because here in America we have all these politicians, and the founding fathers never intended for politics to be a career path. See, that's the rub. It's like, what are you going to do when you grow up? Well, I'm going to be a politician. It's just like Detroit's an interesting city because we were like the hubcap of the wheel of the industrial explosion that happened with Henry Ford and all of that. And so even the city of Detroit's laid out in spoke form like Paris, which is interesting. But so that many of these companies that surrounded the auto industry and all of the technology that arose with that lived in the suburbs of Detroit, in the north of Detroit in Bloomfield Hills, and over near the river in Grosse Pointe, and those were the primary places where you'd find these, huge homes and all of that. Of course, most of those people have moved on because of the deindustrialization of America that came into being through Washingtonian machinations. And but those houses are still there. Who lives there? Well, it's doctors and lawyers. Oh, and then some hedge fund people, financial managers, stuff like that. And so it's very different over here because doctors make a lot of money. I realize in England they don't make the same kind of money, and so it's kind of a weird bought system. So I don't know. It's like Rabbi Alon says, don't take advice from somebody who's been suspected of murder. It's like, that's a kind of a funny statement to make, which is kind of scary, and the truth that it could reveal. But we don't want to get into all that right now. And here we are. We still got some time left. That's good. So, I think it's good that we explore like kind of the antidotes to some of these things, and that there's some really quite heartfelt people within that movement, and see a lot of what's developed in socialism has become largely anti-human, inhumane, so to speak, like, and getting into that whole history, which has been done so effectively by my associates at American Intelligence Media and Americans for Innovation, to where we can now say without any qualms whatsoever that the Communist Revolution was developed out of the British Privy Council and the boardrooms of New York. We know that. And there's other things that we know. A little more obscure, but one of my pet topics is the role that Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, one of your heroes, well, he was one of the people that helped the CIA install Mao Zedong. So, I don't know if he qualifies as a hero. And so the whole idea of trying to get the populace into some kind of a collective, it doesn't matter what you call it, we don't want a middle class. And the one central theme of all this collectivism is the devastation of the middle class. And actually, the upbuilding of the middle class was the impulse that came out of people like William Morris and Carpenter and all of that. So if you think that these modern day collectivisms line up with the impulses of these utopian thinkers, no, they don't. It's a counter image of much that they thought, and that Fabian socialism. Annie Besant, who was head of the Theosophical Society, she was a prominent Fabian socialist, and she set that aside and took on the leadership of the Theosophical Society. Of course, then she went down a squirrely trail, so to speak, with the whole debacle with Krishnamurti, that because he's such a fine character, he set that aside and he said, no, I'm not the second coming. I'm just a guy. And I can't even tell you how many books have come out from him, but people aren't that aware of him anymore. But a brilliant thinker. Even Rudolf Steiner commented that, he was quite impressed that they found a very impressive young man, but afraid he's not the second coming. That's what caused Rudolf Steiner to leave the Theosophical Society, in fact, because he couldn't, to him, the second coming of Christ is something that occurs as a supersensible event, like what happened to St. Paul. It's not, there's some guys can all of a sudden show up and go, here, I'm back, you know, a physical incarnation of Christ. He already did it. He's already incarnated in the earth as a whole. He is the spirit of the earth, whereas he used to be the leader in the realm of the sun, you know, the supersensible realm that one could come into relationship through the ancient mysteries, and that one could have a relationship in the earlier periods of mankind when man was clairvoyant. Men and women mean man meaning an individual human being, not any kind of gender specific thing. Anyways, and so there's a lot we can explore because this is really a tricky subject, because people tend to go, well, that's one of those, and they want to create these boxes. I like what Cliff High says, you know, that there's all these like boxes, and these people think this, and they don't go outside that box. Yeah, you got to think outside the box to be able to come into relationship. And it's like a quote that Evan folds over in the in social media in the Facebook group. He put in a quote of Rudolf Steiner, where Rudolf Steiner says that even if somebody's exploring the supersensible and has the wrong ideas and the wrong conclusions, he says it's actually a good thing, because at least they're attempting to approach the supersensible, and that's better than not doing anything about it at all. Even if the ideas, what they're coming up with, is wrong, at least they're pushing on the envelope, and they're attempting to develop a relationship to the supersensible, even though the ideas they may have about it may be all wrong. You know, that's okay, because in a future incarnation, because of the striving toward the supersensible, they will find that they will gain a greater relationship to the truths that could be revealed through the pursuit of the supersensible and the intentions of the divine spiritual beings that we frequently make reference to. And speaking of intentions, I first want to thank David for coming on here with me, and so steadfast and solid an individual. And somebody's trying to call me. It's Doug Gabriel, and he doesn't know I'm on the air. Douglas.
Yo, Barney, what's happening?
I'm doing my show right now, and now you're on the air because you're talking and they can hear you. So Reverend David says hi.
Oh my goodness, I'm being recorded and broadcast, am I?
Yeah, you're being broadcast.
Well, I don't keep track of time anymore,
yeah.
So I didn't realize it was your broadcast time.
Yeah, well, you're a timeless being, but I'm going to have to let you go now, unless you have something you want to pontificate about.
No, I just got home from going to church, and I tune you in to see what it is that you guys are talking about. And
yeah.
Have a great show.
Yeah, everybody's saying hi, Douglas.
Well, if what is truth? I can always pontificate. So if you need any pontification, I've been following the Reverend, and boy, he is one busy guy, and it's what a fascinating character.
Yeah, absolutely.
Following him on Facebook a lot. It seems as if he's one of the busiest people out there. So.
He's a member of the Royal Asiatic Society. I mean, he's the only guy I know that is.
Every time he posts, I go, whoa, look at that. Look at what he's doing.
Well, that's what British do. Rudolf Steiner called them peoples of the lodge, and that they they join clubs. There's like thousands of clubs all over Britain.
Well, it's always an education tuning into him and to you. So have a great show.
All right.
And my love to all your audience and your faithful audience, and glad they're following to find out what truth is.
All right. Thank you so much. It's funny because I was just going to thank Tyler once again, for helping make this show happen.
Oh, yes.
And also, I want to thank Vadim. He's also my two sponsors, Vadim and Tyler. anyways, you take care, my friend.
Alrighty,
All
thank
right.
you.
Yeah,
Bye
bye.
bye.
Yeah, so that was interesting and nice. Yeah, he's become a fan of yours, David, that's significant. As busy as he is, that he has time to check out your efforts, it's a real kudo. And David, to check out his work is well worthwhile. Here's the Grammar of Witchcraft. David wrote this as a Shakespearean study, and no, it won't tell you how to cast spells. Well, maybe it might, but I don't think so. And here is his Caliban's Redemption, his Shakespearean-esque poetry, trying to find the exaltation within language is always a wonderful endeavor. And his major work, it took him almost 10 years to write it, and it's Mount Athos Inside Me, Essays on Religion, Swedenborg and the Arts, edited by Daniela Irandus, a very talented young man. And this has been really wonderfully received. They're both available on Amazon. And please check them out. Do yourself a favor. And as for myself, I have 2 books. The first one is some 640 pages. And this is the Arcana of the Grail Angel, the spiritual science of the Holy Blood and of the Holy Grail, a study developed out of the work of Rudolf Steiner of the underground streams of esoteric Christianity, which flowed from the Brotherhood of the Holy Grail to the Order of the Knights Templar and the True Rosicrucian Order. And the foreword is by Douglas Gabriel, who was just on the phone with us, and it has extensive diagrams that are also duplicated in the second volume with almost twice as many, given the additional diagrams I came up with. I call them Grail diagrams, and they lay out what you might call the cosmosophy of Rudolf Steiner's anthroposophy, conjoined with the works of great initiates throughout history. And this is the second volume, The Arcana of Light on the Path, a more of a meditative tool. And this has a foreword by the late William Bento, the noted astrosopher and psychologist. But those books are available on eBay from me directly. And there's a link below on both Facebook and on YouTube that'll get you there, or you can get there. There's a link below for my academia page, academia.org, and so you can contact me directly through there, or on Facebook if you're outside the U.S. If you'd like to buy either one of us or both of us a cup of coffee, that's paypal.me/dparry777, as it says below. And for myself, paypal.me/John Barnwell 888. And so we really enjoy. This gives me energy to make it through the week, really. It gives me something to think about, other than what the presenters are trying to pull off, the wool they're trying to pull. And so if we could get Reverend David to consecrate this moment and see if he has any closing comments.
Well, firstly, I wouldn't really say Père Teilhard was a hero. I mean, I admire his writings because I admire his experimental use of language, trying to meld a theological outlook with paleontology. The Wittgensteinian in me finds it a little heavy-handed and forced, and ending up possibly, at the risk of having people jump on me, of not doing justice to either theology or science. I actually do think there's a crossover. I don't think they're inimical. In Europe, we've never ever seen it really as an either or. It tends to be a fluidity, not always, but mostly. So I ended up, I loved some of his work, but yeah, I find it inspirational in what he's trying to do. So I wouldn't really say a hero. Whereas someone like William Morris is. Someone like William Morris is a hero. This sort of, chasing vicars down the road, shouting at them what they're doing wrong in churches, and then going back to not only write poetry in the evening, but plan spectacular wallpaper and carpets. That's heroic. That's heroic. No, I think that's roughly it for me for this week. My deepest respects to Douglas Gabriel, your other half, and yourself. And yeah, I mean, one of the reasons to round off is why I ended up reading the existentialists so heavily, so carefully, is because my trouble with idealism isn't the transcendentalism it's trying to pursue, but what ends up flowing out of that. I mean, too many people are sort of pushed into the sidelines. Whole communities are pushed into the sideline. You don't live up to this ideal, therefore there's something wrong. I mean, my trouble with the churches, I posted that on Facebook earlier today. My trouble is that, they have this sort of princes of the church attitude, where somehow, instead of being sanctuaries for people in need, in homes, communities for people trying to share what it means to be human, these sort of money, financially based institutions where hierarchies are bound and, missing the entire point. I mean, Jesus washed the feet of his disciples. He didn't go around saying, by the way, you don't fit into this category, you're not living up to my standards. That's not what the gospel tells us. So, this holier than thou attitude in the vast majority, dare I say, all the churches I've ever worked with. I mean, it's really depressing. Why are the churches emptying? Because they've got this attitude that it's them at all costs. They're right, everybody else is wrong, and they forget the gospel, our gospel given to all of us, the whole human race, not a class, not a sect, not a church, not a all of us, not a hierarchy, all of us. And I suppose those thoughts are on my mind at the moment as I'm trying to think of a prayer to end today's show. I mean, I'd like us to remember and focus on our commonality. It's wonderful. It's God-given for us to find our gifts and what distinguishes us in the heavenly choir. It's wonderful and it's required. And the Spirit itself, herself, after all, it's a feminine word in Hebrew. The Spirit wants us to differentiate ourselves and become fully ourselves, but not at the expense of our brothers and sisters. That is not the gospel. The gospel is written in every single human heart. It's written deep within our souls and brains. The Christ principle is there at the core of our being, whether we realize it in this lifetime or not. There's no escaping the ultimately transcendental beauty, goodness, and truth of a man that once walked this earth 2,000 years ago and holds out his hands to us to this day to be church with him. My friends, find the light that guides you to the highest in your souls and in your spirits in the week ahead, and may God bless every single endeavor, every footstep, every thought that takes you in that direction. Amen.
Amen. Well, that was a good one, really. I mean, they always are, but that one was particularly heartwarming. Oh, yes. And yeah, if you want to do a little mention of your Nephilim conference, we've got maybe a minute or two.
Well, that actually was put up as a gag at the end, but yeah, because we should end with a prayer. But yeah, I mean, we're still trying to. I mean, it's a fundraiser for our church. We're putting on what's becoming a very respected conference into human origins, the Nephilim Anthropology Conference. We're holding our roundtables, which will bring to an end our 2021 proceedings this year with a glittering array of people in person or online. It's a hybrid event. Hybrid meaning we've got televisual coverage, we've got internet coverage, as well as people on the online. An array of speakers covering lots of different views of what giants, giantism, and human origins actually is. So we've gone for an intercultural, interdisciplinary approach. It's on the 2nd of October if you're joining us in person and want to be there for the thick of it at the Royal Asiatic Society, which is, I mean, it's my sort of a cultural home in so many ways. A wonderful learned institution in the old-fashioned sense, bursting with knowledge and books and manuscripts and paintings and illustrations and poetry. It's a wonderful place. Join us if you get the chance. We're trying to arrange a virtual roundtable as well, which is proving difficult at the moment. So I don't know quite what we're doing about that for the day after. Certainly most of the material this time will not be released. We released the first session because we wanted people knowing what we were discussing. But it's unlikely we'll be doing it this time because some of the speakers quite rightly are saying they want to be paid. Therefore, we're probably... we're starting a GoFundMe. We've got a Patreon. We'll be selling DVDs, and it's of a speech that needs to happen. It's a conference that needs to happen. You know, who are we? Where are we from? And where are we going in life as an individual and as a species? I'm not quite sure. This laptop is now putting something wonderful in front of me. You can find a link. Linktree/Nakanuk, which is of course our Anthropology Think UK. Try and join us. It really will be quite a spectacular day with light refreshments if you can actually be there in person. And we're planning not only DVDs of what the speakers are saying, but also a journal to cover our proceedings. This is the first in at least a 3-year long panel that has very, very strong ambitions to solve some actual crux problems. Who are we as a species and where are we going? That's it, John.
And for those of you who are interested, I'm going to be posting links to the website he just mentioned below this video on YouTube and on Facebook. So in that regard, again, David, thank you so much, and especially for your prayer. And I want to thank everybody for showing up, and for those of you that watch this later on, hello to you too. And so today we'll be signing off, and once again, here we go.